against maybe my better judgment, I got my stuff, loaded it in the trunk, and got in this car with these random strangers. What's up guys, Drew again here. I got another wild story to tell you about. Can't wait to get to it, but first, if you could please hit that subscribe button, subscribe to my channel, I'd really appreciate it. It would let me know that you care. Okay, so this story starts in a little town called Minca. It's up in the mountains in Colombia near Santa Marta. I was there with this Colombian girl named Amy that I had met in Cartagena. She's super nice, and she was kind of showing me around that part of the country. And in Minca, we had some guys ride us around on motorcycles. We saw some waterfalls. It's a really cool place to go visit. But while we were there, she kept telling me that I needed to go to the desert. Basically, the whole northern part of Colombia, what is essentially the northernmost part of South America, is a desert. It's called La Guajira. And she was showing me pictures and just telling me how cool of a place it was. I had no plans to go there. Honestly, I didn't really know much about it before she started talking about it. But the more she talked about it, the more I started to consider doing it. And by the end of our time in Minca, she had really convinced me that this is something that I should do. So I was gonna do it. And the first step was getting there. Again, we were in Minca, which is outside of Santa Marta. She had to go back to Barranquilla, so we were gonna be going to a bus stop and essentially going our different ways. At least that's what I thought we were gonna be doing. So we hop in a taxi cab, and she's from the coast, Barranquilla, and we're in Santa Marta, outside of Santa Marta. Everybody talks so damn fast there, you can't understand their Spanish. So they're talking back and forth, and I'm thinking we're on our way to the bus stop. Actually, we end up at a gas station, and she just looks at me and says, okay, get out, go get in that car. And I'm like, who is in that car? And she says, it's a group of people that are going the direction that you need to go, and they're gonna take you there. But I'm just thinking, that doesn't sound like it's a very good idea. I'm just gonna get in the car with you. Who are they? She gets out of the car and she goes and talks to them, and she comes back and she says, I looked in their eyes, everything's okay, go get in the car with them. So I kind of felt like I didn't have any other option. She was telling me it was safe, so against maybe my better judgment, I got my stuff, loaded it in the trunk, and got in this car with these random strangers. And it's a tiny little car. I'm kind of sandwiched in the back seat. There's this giant Colombian guy on one side of me and this kind of bigger woman sitting next to me. And I'm just kind of sitting there like this, looking like, hey guys. And we start heading up north from Santa Marta. We're going to a place called Rioacha, which is kind of your entrance point into the desert. So we're in the car and we get to talking. Actually, the woman that was sitting next to me spoke good English, and she knew a lot about getting to the desert. She was super helpful. She said that she'll help me get there. She knows a hostel I could stay at in Rioacha, and she even knew a guide that I could use to start making plans to get into the desert. So I got comfortable, they were talking. Eventually I end up falling asleep. It's like a 4-hour ride up to where we were going. And not long after I fell asleep, all of a sudden, boom! And I look out the window, and I'll never forget this, I can still picture it in my head. I see a goat just flying through the air and skipping across the boom, 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 across the ground. We hit a goat. We must have been going like 90 miles an hour, and we hit this thing. It was the loudest sound ever. We pull over, the guy's cussing, looking at his car because it messed up the front of his car. Somebody asked me later on, did the goat survive? No, the goat did not survive. But later on in the trip, we kept eating a lot of goat, and a lot of times there would be like bones kind of mashed up in the meat. So I don't know if we were eating goats that had been hit by cars, and that happens frequently, but anyway. So eventually we make it to Rioacha, which is kind of the last big city before you get into the desert in Colombia. And it's a super cool place. After I dropped my stuff at the hostel, I went out and wanted to see kind of what the area looks like. And I went down, there's like a beachfront area there was tons of children swimming in the ocean that day. I don't know why, but I just kind of stopped there and watched all these kids swimming in the water. There were some other like teenagers jumping off this bridge into the water, and it was just a scene that was very Colombia. There were no tourists there, nobody spoke English, and you really felt like you were starting to get outside of the tourist areas. And it was actually in Rioacha that I got to do some shopping. I wanted to find a really cool gift for one of my best friends, Amy. And actually, as I was walking through the market, I found an instrument made by the local indigenous people, and I thought it was the perfect gift. Check it out. And then later when I got back to the States, I met up with her and gave her this amazing gift. What?
Yeah! Play it for us!
That was pretty funny. So the next morning we went over to the little travel booth where we were going to be meeting up with our guide and the other people that were going to be going on the trip with me. There just so happened to be 3 German guys in town, and they were up for the trip too. So we were all going to do it together. Eventually our guide came. The first thing we realized is that he doesn't speak any English, and they didn't speak any Spanish. My Spanish at the time was okay, so it was apparent that I was going to be the designated translator for the group, which was kind of easy because he didn't speak English and they didn't speak Spanish, so basically I could say whatever the hell I wanted and nobody would know the difference. So I think my information was pretty good most of the time. Anyway, we start heading north from Rioacha, and one of the really cool things about heading into the desert is just watching the landscapes change. You go from this lush jungle environment around Santa Marta to it just becoming drier and drier and rockier. And eventually at one point we stopped by a salt mine and watched the workers there collecting the salt. And it's just so incredible to watch the type of effort that goes into an operation like that. And it really makes you think twice about ever complaining about how hard your life is or your job is when you see what they're doing every single day. After we left the salt mine, we continued heading north. And eventually we got to our first stop along the way where we're going to be spending our first night. It's a small frontier town called Cabo de La Vela. And this place is in the middle of nowhere. It's just this tiny little town, and there's very limited resources there, super primitive. They actually only have electricity from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night, just enough for you to charge the batteries on your phone and camera, and then they shut off the generators and it's completely dark. But one of the interesting things about that place is it's become a hub for kite surfing. I guess because they have a really shallow bay there and strong winds, people come from all over the world to kite surf there. So I was meeting Europeans, people. There was a girl from Belgium that lives in that small little town and kite surfs. So super interesting place. That night we slept in hammocks kind of under the stars, and it was just a super cool introduction and our first night in the desert. The next morning we woke up early and continued heading into the desert. And man, the landscapes just became so different. Eventually the road was gone and we were just driving across this mass expansion of sand, and it was really being out of the city, really being away from everything. And it was just such a cool thing to look out the window and watch this landscape go by. Way up there in the north of Colombia, you're really close to Venezuela. And another thing you see there is passing you by on the roads are caravans of Venezuelans that have come over either to sell gasoline or to get goods that they can't get in Venezuela. And it really gives you an idea of how much that country is struggling right now. There are millions of Venezuelans currently living in Colombia. Another thing that you see as you get deeper into the desert is more of the Wayuu people. It's very interesting. They're an indigenous tribe to that northern part of Colombia, and they were never conquered by Spanish explorers. So they've kept a lot of their culture, the way they dress, even their language is very distinct from other parts of Colombia. And it's really interesting to meet the people and see their traditions. Kasachi Panula. But poverty is a big problem there, and it's really sad to see that aspect of it. As you start going up, there are children and also adults that attempt to block the road with ropes and strings, and they're trying to get you to stop and give them food or water, anything that they can do to sustain themselves. There is some controversy surrounding all of that. Our guide brought things for us to give to the children, but later on we learned that that is somewhat discouraged because the more those kids are out there begging for food and water, they're not going to school, and there is a movement to donate money to the community and not give it to the children. We didn't know about that at the time, but if you do go, that's something you should think about how you plan on handling that, because it is something that you're going to confront. Eventually on that second day, we made it all the way to Punta Gallinas, which is the northernmost spot in Colombia. At that point, you're along these rocky coasts with the waves smashing up over them and going everywhere. And we just spent time exploring the coast, swimming in the beaches there, and there are these massive dunes that come up from the water. Somebody described it as a tsunami in reverse. I thought that was really interesting, and we were jumping off them and just kind of exploring these massive dunes, and it was just such a cool atmosphere. The wind's blowing, and you're just definitely exploring a unique environment. It feels really good to be so far away from civilization, and I thought it was just one of the most amazing experiences that I had during my travels. Another really cool thing that happened is as we were driving, all of a sudden our driver stopped and he walked up to this giant cactus. They use cactus for everything there. They use it for building homes, they use it for making fences, it's everywhere. But at this point he stopped because he had seen a fruit that was on this cactus, and he knocks it off, peels it open, and lets us each try it, and it's this lush fruit. It was so good, and I didn't even know that cactus produced fruit like that. Yeah, like melon, maybe like a little kiwi maybe. I thought it was an amazing trip, and if you're in that part of Colombia, I think you should go. But you should consider some things. One, it is a little bit expensive. I think I paid around $500 for the trip. That includes your sleeping for the night, places to stay, although it's just a hammock, and also all your meals. Another thing, there are few, if any, guides that speak English. So if you don't speak any Spanish and you don't have somebody with you to translate, the language barrier could be a little bit difficult because you're gonna be in a car with this person, and if they can't communicate with you, they can't tell you some things that are cool as you go along the way. Another thing, I talked to some other travelers that felt like it was a bit sad. I talked about the children and adults that are begging for money and food. There is a lot of poverty there, and if you don't want to see that, this isn't the trip for you. It's my feeling that you should stare down the realities of society and the way this world is so that you can be informed and know what the world is really like. But if you think that's going to be too sad for you, this is probably not the trip for you. Another thing is you're going to be spending a lot of time in the car. You're driving through the desert and you have to get from place to place. Long way to get from one stop to another. So if you get car sick, you don't like car rides, probably isn't the thing you'd want to do. I thought it was super cool because the whole time you're looking out the window at these amazing landscapes and just seeing things that you never see in your daily lives. And lastly, I just wanted to warn you about the sleeping arrangements. I was sleeping on a hammock. There is an option that you can have to stay on like a small cot, but this is not luxury. So think about that when you're planning on the trip. Overall, I was plenty comfortable. And that was the desert. I appreciate you listening. Hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions about the trip, please drop me a line in the comments. Also, we can talk about the gear I used while I was both traveling and now that I'm here doing these vlogs. Other than that, I'll see you next time.